today's story is about Queen Esther. It's about, what, 3,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Even though we're still telling... You know, I don't know if dinosaurs were still around back then, but I will say that people were still around, and they wrote down records of our lives.
Like cavemen?
No, not cavemen. So
Nope.
they wrote down, they could write. These people could write. They were very intelligent, and they kept records in their languages of all these people. And so it's all been put into one book. So I like that you brought up dinosaurs, though, Audrey, because the king in this story is named Ahasuerus. Doesn't that sound like a dinosaur name? His name is Ahasuerus. And so for the sake of our minds, not that we're not smart, we have the mind of Christ, we're very smart, we're going to call him King Aha, okay? Because his name sounds like a dinosaur name, Ahasuerus or Ahasuerus. So King Aha, he ruled over 127 states. So he was the king over the best part of the world 3,000 years ago. And do you guys know where India is? Or Ethiopia? So basically, we live on a continent of America, and then there's North America is where we live. There's South America, and then over here is where Ethiopia is at the top of it, and then there's another part that kind of looks similar to Africa called India, but it's way smaller. And so that's where he ruled. He ruled that entire kingdom. There was not as many people on the earth back then. And they all lived where civilization was because they had ability to bring water to their crops, and they had wealth in their land. So they were able to make beautiful clothing and eat really good food. And back then, there was always soldiers attacking each other's kingdoms. And so this guy, Aha, King Aha, he was over one big kingdom that protected all 127 states. So if there's some bullies or enemies that were coming to attack one of those provinces, one of those 127, his soldiers would say, "Aha, not today." And they would make it so those soldiers went away. But one day, something happened. 180 days, King Ahasuerus, or King Aha, had a party. A huge party with the best wine in the kingdom for 180 days. Do you know how long that is?
Wow.
Remember when the quarantine started in March? Remember how long ago that was? Imagine having a party since the beginning of the quarantine. And he said everyone can do their heart's desire. He wanted to show off the wealth and the happiness of his kingdom. So we don't have a crowd. I wish we had felts that was like a crowd of people. But he had all these different king's officials and everybody to show off his massive wealth. And it says here, this is beautiful. It says there was blue curtains fastened to cords, linen and purple on silver rods, marble pillars. The couches were made of gold and silver thread, and the mosaic pavement, which means a lot of different squares of cement, was alabaster and turquoise with white and black marble. This was beautiful, and everybody had their own golden goblet that was different than another to drink from, and they could do whatever they wanted. This was over 6 months long. They were having a big party. And so one day, King Aha gets so festive that he decides, you know what? I want you guys to see how beautiful my queen is. Because back then, the men would go into their own palace to separate, and then the women would party and have their own festival in another part of the palace. And so Queen Vashti was also throwing a party for 180 days for the women. And he said, I want all you king's officials to see my gorgeous wife. I love her. And so he summoned her, which means he had the guys that work for him called eunuchs to go get her. And you know what she said? I got a lot to do with my party, so I'm not coming. And that didn't happen because the king was a very powerful man. And so he became very angry. I don't know if we have an angry face of him. But King Aha, instead of him saying aha, he was mad. What do you mean my Queen Vashti won't come to the party? And so after he got together with his wise men, he had some wise men that were government officials, and he said, what should I do about this? My wife has embarrassed me in front of the most powerful men. I am the most powerful man in the kingdom. And my wife said no to me and wouldn't come to the party. And the wise men advised the king to choose a new queen. He said, well, you're the king. You can do whatever you want. If she doesn't want to listen to you, then we'll just take her away. She won't be the queen anymore because you can do whatever you want. He's like, I like the sound of that. And the reason for that was because they wanted women to not follow the example of Queen Vashti, but they gave this big exaggerated excuse to the king and said, if you don't do anything about Queen Vashti and her disrespect towards you, then all the women in the kingdom will disrespect their husbands. And he's like, this is a problem. And so anyways, God used this event because he has special people that he was gonna bring the grandmas and the grandpas and their children and their babies all the way through, called the Jewish people. And he was going to bring a savior into the world named Jesus. And so this was 1,000 years before that. And so there was Jewish people in Babylon. And so God used this event to save his people, because there was going to be an evil scheme to wipe out his people, which means no savior, which means nobody goes to heaven, which means all of us are lost. Every human is lost and goes to hell, which is terrible. And so a decree was made and sent out for the officers to search all the beautiful single ladies to be brought to the palace for a 12-month day spa. Does anybody know what a day spa is? Have you ever gotten your nails done with your mom or seen your mom maybe put some lotion on her face at night or in the morning, or put on some perfume? Okay, well, I'll explain to you what a spa is. Basically, these were called beauty treatments. I'm calling it a day spa because I thought maybe you guys knew what that was. So what it was, there's all these beauty treatments, and the women, they were not taken according to their own will. These soldiers came into their house, and if they were beautiful and they weren't married, these soldiers took them. And you're coming to the palace. And it was kind of weird because they're just minding their own business at their house. All of a sudden a soldier takes you, and then you have a day spa for a year. So it's like, I don't know, like I am a captive, but at the same time, I'm getting pampered here. And so they were getting these beautiful, like warm baths with huge rose petals in them, and these oil treatments to make their skin so it's not itchy and dry, because this is the desert. There's a lot of sand and stuff there, and this hot desert sun would crack people's skin if it got too dry. They were getting oil treatments. So there was 6 months worth of them getting an oil treatment, and then 6 months of them being beautified. So their hair being braided, maybe massaging their cheeks, just making them more beautiful for the king, okay? And then after that, the king will choose one woman to be queen instead of Vashti. So there's going to be another character we're introducing to this story. His name is Mordecai, okay? He worked in the palace. He had to adopt his cousin because her parents died, and she was a baby when her parents died. So even though she was his aunt and uncle's baby, she was an orphan. Nobody was going to take her. And he said, I'll adopt her as my daughter. And so he adopted his cousin as his own daughter. Her name was Hadassah. This was a Jewish man, okay? And so here come the soldiers. They just break into their house and take his adopted daughter, or his cousin, Hadassah. Hey, you're coming with us. And she's like, what? And so he's like, Mordecai worked at the palace, so he knew a little bit of what was going on with Queen Vashti, but they just up and took his daughter. They took his daughter out of her home and into the palace. And so instead of Esther being afraid and upset about all of this, she chose to actually become friends with the manager of the day spa. His name was Haggai, the royal spa manager, and he gave her the biggest room in the whole entire palace of the day spa where the women were all placed, and he gave her the best beauty treatments without limit, it says here. Wow. And so every day, Mordecai paced back and forth. He was worried. He would walk back and forth like this. He paced back and forth in the courtyard in front of the women's quarters to get updates from Esther on how she was doing. Are you okay? Are they harming you in any way? What's going on? What's going on? What are these beauty treatments? He wanted to make sure his daughter was safe. He loves her. Even though he didn't actually have her, he adopted her, so she's his daughter now. He wants to make sure she's okay. And he told her to not tell anybody that her name was Hadassah. He said, please swear on your life. Do not let anyone know that you're part of God's people, because we only worship one God. We have different ways than everyone else. They don't want to have Jewish people around. So Hadassah is a Jewish name. So she continued to go by her Babylonian name, which is Esther. And so she obeyed. She listened to him. She could have disobeyed. She could have been like Vashti and said, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. But she listened. She listened to her uncle, or to her now father, Mordecai. After 12 months, each young lady got to pick any jewelry and any beautiful gown to wear for her chance to spend a whole day with the king. If she impressed the king, he would choose her to be the next queen instead of Vashti. Haggai, the spa manager, told Esther a few good tips on what jewelry and dress to pick. She listened. She could have said, you know what, Haggai, I thank you for the suggestion, but I want this giant necklace, and put on the biggest gold and dress she could find, but he said, hey, he gave her some advice. I don't know what he said to her. If I made something up, it wouldn't be true. But Haggai gave her advice, and instead of her just choosing what she wanted, she listened to her friend, the spa manager, Haggai, and he said, listen, the king likes this. I know what he likes. Pick this, this, and this. And she said, okay, I'll do it. And so she picked what Haggai told her to. She listened to him. And so then it was Esther's turn to go on a date with the king, Ahasuerus, or King Aha. The king fell in love. She obtained favor in his sight. And he set the royal crown on her head and made Esther the new queen. And the reason she found favor in his sight is because she didn't just go do her own thing. She listened and obeyed the advisors in her life, like Mordecai and Haggai. She listened to them. She could have said, you old men don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to do what I want to do. And so because of her obedience, she ended up to be queen. And God actually had a plan, the reason she was queen, not just because to give Esther an awesome life, but because he has a whole people group scattered through all 127 provinces that this king rules over, and they were about to get killed. Okay? Spoiler alert. So her big cousin / father, Mordecai, worked at the palace, and he overheard of a secret plan for 2 palace officers that were going to kill the king. Mordecai told Esther, because they would rendezvous, which means they would meet together, like maybe sometimes secretly, and he'd be like, hey, I heard about the 2 gate guards. They're really mad at the king, and they're going to try to kill him. And now she's the king's wife, so she could tell the king this evil plan so he wouldn't get killed. And so she's the queen now. And Mordecai told Esther, and then she told her husband, the king, and it saved his life. This good deed was recorded in the king's royal journal. Okay? And then a few months later, the king put a man named Haman in charge of the whole kingdom, second in command. Haman didn't like Mordecai, okay? Which is Esther's cousin that adopted her, so her father. He didn't like Hadassah, or Esther's father, because this was the thing. They worshiped many gods, including people, and he required, whenever he walked by, he would touch everybody's heads and bless them, like this. But it wasn't for the true God. He would just be like, I'm so wonderful, kiss my ring, kiss my ring. And so Mordecai was like, backed up, like, who are you? And he said, I will not bow to you. And so Haman was very angry with that, because he became violent, because Mordecai refused to bow to him. Okay? And he also found out that Mordecai just so happened to be a part of a people group that is one chosen people group from out of all different families in the earth called the Jewish people, and they only worship one God, not many. He already didn't like Jewish people. And he's like, oh, Mordecai, just one more of those people I don't like. And so Mordecai got so angry. It says, Haman hated touching his head and blessing him because he discovered he was Jewish. He thought he was disgusting. He's like, oh, why do I have to bless him? I hate touching Jewish people. And because he discovered he was Jewish, Haman didn't like the God of the Jews or their exclusive ways of worship, which means they only worship one God, not many. And he wanted them gone. Haman had a meeting with the king, with King Aha. And he said, King, he told him about the people group, a people group that were scattered throughout all 127 provinces. He said, okay, there's Haman. I don't know why he looks like he's in ballet, but there's Haman, and he's talking to King Ahab, and he said, did you know, O king, are you aware of a people group called the Jews, that they're in all the neighborhoods in all the states in your entire kingdom, and they not only do they not worship you, but they only worship one God. It says here, their laws are different from every other people, neither do they keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not the king's profit to tolerate them. I will give the royal treasury 10,000 talents of silver if you will let me set a decree, a royal law for every province to murder their Jewish neighbors. So this means if you're a Jew, all of a sudden your neighbors, if they don't like you, they can just come out with weapons and hurt you until you're no longer alive. And I know that's sad, but that is what happened. He paid the king off. He gave him 10,000 talents of silver because he let him set a royal decree in every province to murder the Jewish neighbors. The king stamped it with his signet ring, and the day was set, February 25th. February 25th, all lands were commanded to kill any Jewish person they knew, even the children. Haman was happy and went home to drink for a while, while the rest of the kingdom was confused about this alarming law. They're like, why is this a law for us to kill other people? This is not right. So they were troubled, it says. And then Mordecai, to show that he was sad about the law because it was going to kill all his family, he put on black clothing and he rubbed ash on his head, like from the fire, like coals of fire. He rubbed ash on his forehead to show everyone that he was grieved about something. And Esther spoke with him privately because everyone required to look happy in the palace that worked there. She's like, what are you doing? She's like, you know you could be killed for this, for not looking happy. Why are you wearing black with ash on your forehead? She didn't know about the decree. She's been in the palace. And so he says, Mordecai told her about the new law and was made to kill all Jewish people. She didn't know what to do. She was afraid. But Mordecai told her, God is the one who gave you favor to be the queen, Esther. You're not just a queen. You can't hide here in the palace while the rest of us die. It's not right. He said the whole reason you're queen is because God has a plan for you. And it's to save the people, of the Jewish people, for such a time as this. You have to use your words and your actions. You have to be brave. And so she did it. She said, okay. He said, if you don't do anything, God will find another way to save the Jews. And your life will still be in danger for hiding in the palace while your people are being killed on February 25th. And so she listened to Mordecai. Can you guys see a theme through the story? She listens. She listens to Mordecai. She could have said, I'm scared. No way. She's like, I'm safe. This is none of my business. You guys are going to have to find some way to protect yourselves. No, she used her position and she actually trusted God, because she could have been, if she goes into the king where his throne is and without him asking her to come, she could be dead. And so she had to take a risk. She went into the king's throne, and she took a risk, and she went before the king right here. It says, I thought it said it best here. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house. While the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out his royal scepter to Esther that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What's your request? It will be granted you up to half the kingdom. And so Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I've prepared for you. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther prepared. And that banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what's your petition? I know you have something else you want to ask. Now just ask me out to dinner. It will be granted you up to half the kingdom. And Esther said, my petition is this. And she got a little scared. So instead of saying what her real question was about her people being killed, she invited him to another dinner. She said, if I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them tomorrow, and I will do as the king has said. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And his family advised him to set up 11 massive 75-foot tall poles with a big old rope on it. Haman made a hangman's noose 75-foot high to hang Mordecai on it. Basically, the king, after Mordecai told Esther, you need to do something about this. For such a time as this, God has made you the queen. She said, okay, I'm going to pray. Me and all the girls in my palace are going to pray. And when we do, I will go into the king. And so, because she did that, guess what? The king couldn't sleep that night. And she was praying. Her and her friends were praying, God, what do we do? And guess what? The king couldn't sleep that night. And so he had his royal journal read to him, almost like a bedtime story, to get him calmed down so he could go to sleep. But this was an act of God just disturbing him because he couldn't go to sleep. And so when they read him the journal, it talks about Mordecai and how Mordecai saved his life. And he remembered that. And the next day, he called Haman in, and he said, what would you do for a man that is very pleasing to the king? And Haman thought, oh, he's going to do it for me. So he's like, I would put a royal robe on him, and every 10 feet say, this is what you do for a man that the king honors. Well, guess what? He said, great, do that for Mordecai. And Haman got mad because he was like, not Mordecai, I hate that guy. So Haman had to be the one that led him forward and said, this is what the king does for someone he's well pleased with. And everyone had to clap and cheer every 10 feet. This is what the king does for someone he's well pleased with. Everyone would have to clap and cheer. And Haman's sitting there like, this is killing me, because he did not like Mordecai. And so the next day, Haman goes to this banquet again with Queen Esther and the king. And he feels very, very important, because the king and the queen and him are the only ones, the most powerful people in the whole kingdom, and they're eating dinner together. And then Esther drops the big question. What is your request, Queen Esther? She said, let my life be given me at my petition. She said, don't kill me. And the king's confused. He's like, don't kill you. Darling, I would never kill you. You're my true love. And she said, and my people upon my request. This is what I'm asking for, is for my own life. She said, we've been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. And we have been sold as male and female slaves. I would have held my tongue, but the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is this? Where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Queen Esther pointed at Haman across the table and said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified, started shaking. Oh no, I'm going to be dead. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that the evil was determined against him. They said, look, the gallows 75 feet high, which Haman has made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, because Mordecai saved his life. He said, is standing at the house of Haman, that because they were preparing to kill Mordecai. Haman and his family were. He had 10 sons. The king said, hang him on it instead. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath he was like, okay, that was justice. And so they had already made a law that everybody was going to come kill their Jewish neighbors on February 25th. And because the king stamped it with his signet ring, it couldn't be changed, even though Haman was defeated. So Queen Esther says, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and that things seem right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of, these guys that wanted to hurt my people. How can I bear it if all my people die? And King Aha, he said to the Queen Esther, I'm so sorry, Queen, but I can't change the law. But here's what you can do. You can add to the law. You can add to it. he's like, I'm so sorry, my darling. I'm so sorry that your people have decreed this thing I didn't know. And so he said, you yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, and you, as you please, in the king's name, and I will seal it with my signet ring for whatever is written. So the king's scribes were called at that time, and Mordecai commanded to the Jews and all the people in all the provinces, to every province, every people in their own language, he wrote in the name of the king and sealed it. And it said this. It said, by these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day in all the provinces, we're just saying it's February 25th, because that's the day they celebrate Purim this year, of the king Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was issued as a decree in every province and published for the people. That all the people that were going to rise up and kill these Jews, they were delivered from their violent enemy, you guys, and they got to protect themselves. And they were given weapons to actually withstand their enemies. And so today, because Esther risked her life and went before the king, and she actually listened, they still celebrate a holiday today called Purim. And what it is they celebrate the day that God rescued them. Their people, all of them were going to be killed that day. And God turned the whole thing around because Esther said something to the king. And they still celebrate it today.
God!